Hello, this is a short video to try and give an overview of how I am going to approach and move towards blended learning. So one of the first things I thought about when we went into lockdown in March 2020 was where is the heart of my learning, where's the heart of my work? And whereas when we're on campus, the heart would really be the lectures and the seminars and the face-to-face work, and everything else kind of wraps around that. Whereas a move to blended learning really needed the heart to be somewhere else, because we couldn't rely on that face-to-face, in-person opportunity to explain lots of the nuances and to get across the key information that we wanted to, whether that be content or organisational or assessment-focused content. So the heart needed to go more online. What that meant was I needed to review my use of learning space and our Moodle and a VLE as well. So what my first thoughts were that my teaching is, if I was to distill it into three areas, it would be the content, the engagement and the connection. So content being, how do we get across information, how do I pass on information, how do I signpost, how do I create in a lecture. If I'm going to stand up and talk for 10 minutes, it's that knowledge that I'm trying to exchange. If I'm going to share a video, if I'm going to ask students to read something, that is the pure content. Then the engagement is, how do I create an engagement with that content? How do I encourage students to actually think about what that content is, to repackage that knowledge, to apply it in different ways, and to just take on board the content which is in the words, the concepts. So that would be engagement. And then the third part is connection, so connection with others. How do I increase and maintain good point of connection between myself and my students, but also between students and students, between students and other colleagues at work, between students and professionals? How do we maintain good levels of connection? So those were the three areas that I wanted to make sure that I embedded into any change. What we're going to do now is spend a couple of minutes looking through the VLE to show you some of the things that I've developed and learnt, developed, stolen, all sorts of things. So I'll just swing over to the other screen. So this would be one of my typical pages on Moodle prior to lockdown. I thought I maintained quite good pages, and the reason I thought they were quite good is that I've tried to keep them relatively clean. I use embedded slides so that they're more visible. I try not to have too much information on there, especially information which is from previous years, so I review that as much as possible. This one's organised into different conditions, different topics, rather than weeks, and sometimes those topics spread across weeks. Others are organised into weeks. I've got a podcast in there, so I think this is quite good. But what I found was that this Moodle space is used more as a depository where I post articles which are referred to in the practical sessions, because the practical sessions, the face-to-face on campus, has always been the heart of the session, and so there was always a sense of needing to explain some of the content and draw attention to the content which was stored on the VLE. So one of the first things I thought about is how I can create a new a narrative, and how I organise the positioning of all that information. So the first thing I looked at was how I can change the graphical representation, the user experience of engaging with Moodle. So one of the things that I've worked on is trying to avoid the scroll of death. So whereas we have lots of information, now this page here has quite a lot. This is my practice page. There's lots of sections on here, but you can see here that I've got 8, 9, 10 weeks almost on one screen. This is a collapsed approach, so anything that people want to dive into, they can, but a typical week might look something like this, where there is not a lot of information, but it has its own narrative. There is lots of information on there, but it's not all presented on the same level. So this is the next stage I'm going to show you in a second, and this is the use of a book feature in Moodle, which is effectively a small wiki, a small web page which has several pages, a small website, and we'll look at that in a second. And then I've got some feedback tools in there. So once a student has entered that top page, they would then and I've got a different one here that's a bit more finished. I'm then going to focus most of my teaching content around this, which is called a book in Moodle. As I say, is effectively a small website. So each of those will have an introduction on the top. Now this one's got a GIF on the top which looks a bit jazzy, but what I'm going to do is to place videos of myself short videos of no more than 2 minutes, just explaining what this week's work is about. So it's not a lecture, it's just a video. It will give a brief overview of some of the aims and outcomes of the block of learning that are presented textually below, and it will try to try to connect with my students as well. So it'll be slightly less formal. Then on the right hand side you can see there's a table of contents. So whereas before I would have had this may have been a 2-hour lecture, maybe a practical as well, and I would have, in my mind, I would have had sections within that content of content exchange, of engagement with the material, of connection with others, of repackaging, discussing the content. I now need to try and focus those stages into different pages. So in this typical one here, which is on aerobic conditioning, the first page might be acute responses, and I've got a diagram in here, but I might have a recorded short 10-minute, 15-minute lecture. There might be slides, there might be reading, and then I move on to chronic adaptations. Obviously these sessions could be completely different sessions. This is a link that I've embedded. If I want a hyperlink on these books, then I think it's important to have something more visual than just in the text. So a rule I've made for myself is to have all key hyperlinks represented visually as well. So you can see there should be a link up somewhere below. There's a link below, but there's also a diagram. So it's obvious that there's something that needs to be attended to, somewhere that the students need to go. So that will open in a different page. Like I say, this one's slightly missing. It's missing lecture slides, or there's some lecture slides. It's missing me presenting my lecture slides, which will be embedded just as this one is. I may end up embedding both. Again, if I want students to go somewhere, then I try to embed an image as well to make it more obvious. The final thing that I've embedded is I've been working on how to use Moodle more to use the feedback tools and the questionnaire tools. So unfortunately I can't embed those into a book. So what I've done is I've got a hyperlink here, and you might have seen this just below the book in the main page of the Moodle. But at the end of a session, or possibly during, I've got an opportunity for students to use this integrated feedback form system in Moodle. So these are rubbish questions, but the first question I've got is a multiple choice questionnaire, which is a way of checking a formative assessment of the learning within the session. But other questions, and I might have several of those questions, other questions would be a form of quite active learning, but is a form of engagement with the content. So given some information, asking the students to think about it, and then asking them to upload a response to check learning into a deeper level. And then I've also used the same form to have a question which allows students to reflect back to me about things that they might have understood not understood quite so well, and also requests for more information. So these are just an example of different ways that I can use the same form, and I might well embed them all into the same form. So I can do formative assessments, I can check levels of learning, and I can also offer students a chance for feedback. I can also, the whole effort of completing this work would demonstrate to me a level of engagement as well. The students that have filled it out and paid and given good time to filling it out, I would assume have engaged with the content, and those that haven't will get an email from me. A nice one. So that's a brief overview of some of the changes that I've made in thinking about where my learning is situated. The thing that's missing from the book that you've just looked at is there's also an opportunity to outline tasks that might take place with other students, or tutorial tasks, or tutorial briefings, workshop briefings. So bringing everything together in a week block, most likely, allows me to disaggregate the content that used to sit within a lecture and a workshop, disaggregate them out, and one of those pages may well be an outline of the face-to-face contact and content that we will be having during that block. So rather than the lecture and the workshops being the whole and the sort of most important unit to me, this is where the learning, the scaffolded learning sits, and the lecture and the practical content will sit within this block. Therefore making it more easy if we can't do the face-to-face practicals, it's much more easy to swap that out and replace it with something else, and the learning's not lost or doesn't have to be changed drastically. So that was a quick overview of some of the changes that I've made. Some of the other pages on this Blended Learning Toolbox go into more of the technical detail of some of the tools that could be embedded in this system, but this is my overview of where I think the learning sits and how I've made use of a tool that already exists to me but that I haven't been using in quite the same way. So thanks for watching. Hope you found it useful.